Nothing can beat this.
Not even a pillowcase filled with candy?
No. This is a pillowcase filled with candy. Except it's a cup filled with candy.
The trick-or-treat blast.
That's so good.
Episode 9 of Film Room with Chris Jans, Adam Young alongside Coach. And today, Coach, we go back to your first year. You only had this young man for 1 year, but boy, did he fill it up. 20 points per game for Zach Lofton in his only season. He could really score for you.
Yeah, he's a scorer. He's always been a scorer. Certainly he was a scorer before he arrived at our place. Another young man that was well-traveled prior to putting the Aggie uniform on. And we're really proud of the fact that what we sold him in the recruiting process is we were going to make him more efficient. And if you look at his numbers and really scrutinize them, he became a more of an efficient player at an MSU prior to him being here in terms of his percentages went up from 2, his percentages went up from 3. He took less shots but scored more points. That's the most points he'd ever scored, or at least average in a college basketball season. And trust me, he was always known as a scorer at all of his stops as well. And arguably the best offensive player I've ever coached, and I've coached for a long time, but if you add up his size, his body, his skill, his feel, he was a hard guard. I can't imagine preparing for him, and trying to play the Aggies.
All right, Coach, let's start the Lofton film. Was he a creative scorer? Is that one of the ways you would define him?
He could do a little bit of everything. That was the best thing about him. He was big. Like, I remember when he arrived on campus, I can't remember what he was listed at, but he was bigger than what I thought he was listed at, which is exciting, for a coach. And he was thick. He's a straight 2 guard, and he was a big, strong kid, and he loved to work at his game. He loved to work at his game, as much or more than anyone we've ever had. And he spent a lot of time in the gym by himself, working on his touch and his skill level and his finishing, which we're going to show you here. He had an uncanny ability to finish around the basket. And being that big and experienced certainly helped. But he had all sorts of finishes, and he would go, what he would like to say, he'd go in his bag and find a way to get the ball in the basket. He slithered through 2 guys there, and he could post up too, which was a nice luxury. And he was big, strong enough that if he could get through contact, he could get to the line. He backed people down and had an array of moves around the basket that really benefited him and us. And then in ball screens, wow. He was really, really good in ball screens. He was probably one of the best we've had at refusing ball screens. We talked about ball screen offense earlier, and that's a great way to combat the defense. It's just to refuse it and go where they're not, and he was really good at it. And then when he got by the rim, again, he was a really creative finisher. But he wasn't just about him. Like trust me, he would take what the defense gave him, and he had a eye to score. But he would definitely give the ball up when required and when needed, and hit other people during his ball screens.
Because he was such a high-volume scorer, Coach, did you have a longer leash with him because you knew he could score in bunches like he did here in the tournament?
I probably didn't tell him at the time, but he certainly did, just because I knew that if he could get it going, he could go on a run. He was the one guy that year that we had that he could go on an 8 to 10 point spurt on his own, and he did it many times, especially when we were down. It's like internally I was thinking to myself, okay, Zach, we need one of those patented runs that you're famous for, and he did it a ton for us. But he was really hard to guard because he could score from deep, he could score at the rim, he could score at the mid-range, he could get to the line, and he had an array of moves. You see a 1 foot pullback jumper there that is a really hard shot. But like I said earlier, when people start double teaming him, all right, he would make the right read and give it up to his teammates. He was a really good passer. A lot of scorers aren't, but he was a good passer. He saw the floor, and he was a willing passer.
I always felt this. Did you feel like there were a lot of media timeout stretches from, say, the under 16 to the under 12 where maybe you're up 3 or 4 and now you're up 15 and it's all Zach Lofton offensively?
He had a lot of runs. Like I said earlier, he had of any player I've ever coached, he certainly had the capability of being one of those guys that could just change the game on his own. He really could. He could take over a game, and it was a luxury to have. To the point sometimes where we relied on it too much as a team, especially as teammates, where they were waiting for Zach to get going, and that could be a detriment as well. He could really shoot the ball, just catch and shoot it off the bounce, shoot it with range. He was always a threat, which helped the whole team with spacing. He'd come off screens. He was a pretty good reader of screens. And again, range was no issue. He could shoot it from anywhere. He was fun to play with. I mean, obviously I didn't play with him, but I'd imagine as a teammate, he was fun to play with because of the obvious. He could really get it going. He could help the team get out of a slump offensively. And we're probably not going to show much of it, but he became a willing defender. He really became a willing defender. Obviously around here, you have to guard to get on the court, and it was a struggle at times, but I always sold him on the fact that, hey, you've worked your tail off to be this great offensive player. There's no reason that you can't be a good defender too. You know the game, you have a high IQ, you have quickness, you have good hands, strong hands, big hands, and he certainly was never a best defender, but he got a lot better on that end of the floor.
38% from three, Coach, on 229 attempts. Those are pretty good numbers.
If you look at what his numbers were prior to our place, they weren't very good in that department. He was more of a volume shooter, and it's what we sold him on. And fortunately, he bought into it, and we're proud of that fact. We get him to understand quality shots, get him to understand being a more efficient player was going to help his status, if you will. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little surprised that he didn't get more of a shot in the league. And I think, and again, I can't speak for any of the executives or the decision makers in that league, but I think his age has something to do with it. They really go for the younger guys. It's a young person league, and they try to develop them. But Zach's going to make a lot of money playing basketball for as long as his body will hold up and as long as he wants to, because, especially in the European markets, they're looking for guys that can score the ball, and that's what Zach Lofton did for us, and that's what he's done his whole life.
We saw a lot of combination clips there with him and Jamario. Do you feel like they complemented each other really well?
They did. And Zach was really smart when he arrived. He was the newcomer. He got here late, and he took a chair in the locker room right by Jamario. And I think he realized that Jamario had the locker room, that he needed to develop a relationship with Jamario, and I thought that was a very smart move on his part. And certainly that they both had huge years. We haven't had a team like that since they left, where we relied on two guys like we did that season. But fortunately, we had both of them in our first season.
Let's finish with this, Coach. Next week is the CBU game. We'll take a look back at that one. What do you remember most about that game?
Just that sequence. It's probably a sequence that I've seen more on social media than any sequence that I ever remember of the dunks, and I'm sure we'll reminisce about that next time.
All right, looking forward to it. Coming up next week, our 10th and our final episode of Film Room with Chris Jans.